today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the ball. Me out to the buy me some.
On the 7th of January 2019, the Monday morning quarterback from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Boston Red here in the Jerry Pippin Broadcast Center. I was just looking through our archives and found, I think, 3 or 4 programs that we did with the late, great Jerry Pippin. We'll be presenting those programs over the winter months. One was on the issue of Professor Gates, who many people know that was the notorious beer summit. Professor Gates, the head of the W.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard University, was literally going in his own house and was profiled by this racist copper there in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Became a cause célèbre, literally, and they had a beer summit at the White House with Barack Obama at the time. And Jerry was commenting on that and a number of other topics out there that Michael Jackson was one, the passing of Michael Jackson. So we have some timely materials to bring forward, and of course the extensive work that Jerry and I did on the Affordable Care Act. Unfortunately, Jerry passed in 2015 before DJ Trump cranked up his presidential campaign, or we would have had mounds of material to deal with that particular issue. Talk a little bit here about Iowa. Over the weekend, as many people are aware, particularly the quote-unquote political junkies that watch the so-called cable networks. Elizabeth Warren was in Iowa. She was all over Iowa. People were lining up blocks to sign up for her campaign. Now, this is an interesting situation when we start to look at 2020 and how the primaries will shape up. California, normally the one of the last ones in June, and I believe the last one is either Indiana, South Dakota, or something like that. People can make commentary on that, and we'll keep up with that calendar. But if you recall, we had in 1968 Senator Robert F. Kennedy. He was a senator from New York, and he was assassinated in Los Angeles right after the California primary in June. And they were, at that point in time, getting ready for the last of the primaries, and he was on to Chicago, as he said. Well, I'm not certain where the Democratic convention this time will be, but it'll be a fast-track situation. We go into Iowa, that'll be next year this time, and then it's on to New Hampshire, and I believe the next stop is either South Carolina or Nevada. Nevada has a caucus situation. South Carolina has a primary, unless they've changed it. Now, in Iowa, you have the Iowa caucuses, a little different situation there. But because of the fast track, when you go to Super Tuesday, and California will be part of Super Tuesday, you'll hear some commentary from the CBS Face the Nation panel. They're talking about how it will all line up. Well, we don't know, but what we do know, it'll be very, very fast-tracked in terms of people making decisions. Normally, the decisions, we go back to Barack Obama's campaign. We all went downstate to the old state house. It was bitter cold there in Illinois, and that's where Barack Obama, the then senator from Illinois, announced his presidential race. And then, of course, he raced off to Iowa and had time to build an organization in Iowa. It's a long ways from Boston to Des Moines, but nonetheless, Elizabeth Warren has shown that she can make the track. Now, how does this complicate or compact we'll use the word compact effect, perhaps, the normal 4 seats out of Iowa? We call it 4 seats. We usually say 3 seats. That's who does first and second, and a lot of that would depend. Bernie Sanders was in a razor-thin race with Hillary Monster Clinton, and by most, Bernie won that race. But nonetheless, he went out with a second place where they had to do the counting, and he actually ended up in first place. And that has happened before in Iowa because of the instability. But the problem with these campaigns, how they be fast-tracked, Elizabeth Warren has already hit the road running, so to speak. When will Bernie Sanders appear in Iowa? He's been there many, many times. They have name recognition. They should be in one of the 4 seats, in other words, from 1 to 4th place in the campaign. And then you'll have the so-called hotshot types like Beto O'Rourke. If he decides to come into Iowa, it is set up for him. And then we have the home girl, so to speak, Ms. Klobuchar of Minnesota. Now, compare her to Michelle Bachmann, it's an insult, but being from a neighboring state does in fact help one out, as it did with Barack Obama and with Jesse Jackson when Jesse Jackson went into Iowa. And even the campaign, it was short with the national leader Al Sharpton. Most people don't remember right now, but Al Sharpton did run for president. He talked about domestic issues. That was the campaign that Brother Kerry won the nomination there. But Al Sharpton was in the race. He was not much into foreign policy. Foreign policy this time around, will it be in the race? Will it not be in the race? Be very interesting there where it will be. There is a shutdown of the government at this time. Will that hurt DJ Trump? Well, one of the situations is anything on the so-called back burner that hurts your campaign, you want it to happen early. That's sort of like Elizabeth Warren and her heritage. She's telling the people of Iowa she's not a person of color. That's quite obvious. We know that. But she is guarding against that and getting it out there very, very quickly. And you'll see other people get issues out. One of the comments from the CBS people, DJ Trump, of course, his campaign is moving on. The character we call the Kansas basketball player, I forget his name right now, but he's in San Antonio, Texas, and that is DJ Trump's analytics shop. There was a misnomer out there that the Republicans, and specifically DJ Trump, did not have analytics. They did. They had some of the best analytics out there, and it turned out their analytics were better than Hillary the Monster Clinton. And they know how to use it, or at least they came out, as they say, with some serendipity and were able to pull it off. But this time they have time to target, and DJ Trump's theme will be, I took care of my campaign promises. Now, that's where the wall is there. Now he's going to build, a chain link fence? But that is a very tenuous situation because you're talking about January, a year out. Anything can happen within a year. The Democrats are gearing up to do some investigating. They are waiting on Robert Mueller. And incidentally, he has got what effectively is a 6-month lease on life, for the investigation will go on, no doubt, into the spring. How far into the spring, one does not know. We could have the shutdown and the Mueller report at the same time in March. We don't know. There are a lot of unknowns in this year, as the people from Face the Nation pointed out. We have Kamala Harris, an African-American lady coming out of the populous state of California. And on the East Coast, Twitter King Booker. Now, what will Twitter King be able to do in New Hampshire? In Iowa, perhaps not as much, but he will, no doubt, if he decides to run, have an organization there. Is Twitter King running for VP, or is Twitter running for president? Who knows? Then there's a lot of other names thrown out there, easily out of Washington State. He's running, no doubt, for VP. But if you have a situation where you have a logjam coming out of Iowa and also in New Hampshire, and as you go into Nevada and South Carolina before Super Tuesday, you could have someone else step into the race. And we did not forget Joe Six-Pack Biden. Mr. Rove said that he will not run. That'd be interesting if he decides to come in or not. He's actually calling people up and asking them, or people have asked them to call people, I should say that, would they come into his organization. That is an old political trick. You get people to come to you by using that method. In other words, you get a mother to call a daughter, or get the daughter's phone number from the mother, and then Joe Biden calls the daughter to put some energy into the campaign. Now, those are some of the unknowns, and how that they run. Will Joe Biden just simply wait around and see how Iowa shapes up in terms of who announces that they will be a candidate? He has got some time to do it because he is a known name. He could save, he could wait until June or perhaps even July to get his campaign going, because he has a de facto organization already in Iowa. But some of the other people that are not known in Iowa have to get in there very quickly. Not so much Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders can wait and see a month or so, too. Amy Klobuchar can't do that. She needs to get there and get started. For one, there's always this problem of staffing, of finding people that are nominally qualified to be in a national campaign. It's a different situation there. Caucuses like Iowa, you can kind of stumble through those. You can go into New Hampshire. It's wide open in New Hampshire. It's just an idea of going from hamlet to hamlet to hamlet. That's basically your stratagem there. But then it gets more serious along the way. And are you going to have the money to go into a place like California, where it costs a hell of a lot of money to run a campaign? Those are some of the things that we're just throwing out here on the 7th of January. Let's go to ESPN. ESPN evidently got in trouble doing a Colts game. I had it up here, but I don't see it now. The quarterback, I think his name is Luck. I'm not that familiar with him. We're really not covering the NFL season this year because of the boycott, the treatment of Colin Kaepernick, not only the treatment of Colin Kaepernick, the treatment of African-American coaches, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, we have a baseball story. This is a Union chief. His name is Tony Clark. Find a way to fire up the hot stove, the hot oven. This is by Buster Oney. He's appeared. He's the senior writer now. If Tony Clark had asked, I would have suggested the Major League Players Association chief give a holiday read of Joyce Kearns Goodwin's book, Leadership in Turbulent Times. Within it, she writes about the different leadership styles of Herbert Hoover and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as they faced the nation's worst financial crisis of their time, or any time at that time. And we could have added the name Barack Obama there also. As President Hoover did nothing and changed nothing, believing that the situation brought on by the Great Depression would correct itself. In other words, it'd be self-correcting. Once Roosevelt was inaugurated, that was in the spring of 1933. He attacked the problem with an approach learned through the years when he went through a rehabilitation for polio. Most people didn't know that at the time. President Roosevelt could not walk. He had braces, and he was seen sitting down. And when he was standing with his braces. The press was not like it is today in national type of gawkers, whatever type thing. The first Esquire. The first 100 days of Roosevelt's presidency, he worked to spur the economy with sweeping proposals and change, and evidently got enough of the generated ideas, created attraction for the turnabout. This is what the NBA start over again. The MFB, the Major League Baseball Players Union, so desperately needs right now: engagement, ideas, dialogue, and negotiation. Jeff Berry, who wrote this memo, leaked last month and published last week to spur a conversation to identify areas in which the players and a union could forge some unity and strategize there. So this is much needed. We'll take a quick look at the memo here, because after all, this is the Monday Morning Quarterback. The text of Agent Jeff Berry's memo to the players. For more than a decade, 10 years, there's been a calculated and increasing encroachment on players' rights and further institutionalization of the way the 30 major league teams spend, operate, and act, despite increasing MLB revenues and franchise valuations. In the new world order of analysis and aging curves, tanking and shutting and openers, bull pinning, declining attendance, and declining salaries, players should and do feel vulnerable and unsure. Commissioner Manford has publicly blamed Clark and the PA for everything from downtrending attendance, the pace of play, lack of communication skills, and not understanding the analytical evolution of players' evaluation. Major League Baseball has publicly blamed agents for their failure to accurately assess the market. The commissioner has gone so far as to blame Mike Trout for the lack of commercial appeal. None of it's true, but this doesn't stop Major League Baseball and the Commissioner Commissioner, from spoiling this destabilizing narrative. During the Meteor Day, that was in 2018, All-Star Game, the Commissioner stood there. No big rush to do everything because we are in the middle of a labor contract. He also said the only purposeful behavior that took place in the free agency market last year is our clubs have carefully analyzed the availability of players. Oops. Getting ahead of myself here. The availability of players. It's now the LRD versus singular players agent system. General managers and assistant general managers are rarely involved, as most negotiations are now handled by lower level workers. This term, negotiator, is being is given march orders and a deep depth numbers from LRD. The players don't not agree to the LRD numbers and the LRD arrangements for the outside counsel to take over the case in preparation for trial. The systematic approach has removed individual teams' responsibility and exposure and has successfully stagnated ABR salaries. Regardless of the status of the team-player relationship, individual teams no longer feel accountable or burdened by having to determine their own settlement numbers or the decisions to take a player to a hearing. They're just following the rules. This is the LRD construct file and the trial system. Let me just finish this up. It's very long. It is very, very long. Okay, all players report to spring training on the mandatory reporting date as outlined in the CBA. Players are not required to report to spring training until February the 23rd. That's 23 days prior to opening day. However, the Major League Baseball has scheduled spring training games on the 21st and 22nd of February with a full slate of Grapefruit and Cactus League games scheduled on the 23rd. Boycott of interviews, participation. Major League Baseball owned Major League Baseball Network and any of its affiliates. Boycott of all off-season teams, fan fests, and caravans. Boycott all individual teams and Major League Baseball requested autographs and memorabilia signings. Boycott all individual team and Major League Baseball promotional commercials. Players and agents boycott the general managers' meetings. No fiscal presence. Players and agents boycott the winter meetings. No fiscal presence there. Last season was a disaster for players and for the Major League Players Association. Rather than simply accepting the status quo and rambling towards a work stoppage, unified membership strategies should be considered and potentially implemented well before the expiration of the CRA. Major League Baseball and the LRD have proven to be well organized and formidable, despite explicable campaigns to devalue their greatest assets, the game and its ability to entertain and connect with generations of fans has always driven by players and their incredible efforts. Now in Minnesota, the T-Wolves fired their coach. Let's see if we can get this in here. Maybe. Well, we thought we would be able to get just a little bit of this in while we are here. Now we'll try it again.
Woj, let me ask you this: is based on the people you've talked to at this point, what led to this? It felt as if, from a fan standpoint, it kind of came out of the blue.
It did. I mean, the team had won a couple games here, but this has been some time in the making between Tom Thibodeau and ownership, Glenn Taylor. For now, Scott Layden will stay in as the general manager. Now, he reported to Tom Thibodeau. He was president and coach. But
Tom,
once the Jimmy
Thibodeau
Butler saga started to unravel,
that was the
beginning of the end for Tom Thibodeau.
That has been on the edge of mediocrity for many, many years. They've tried new coaches. They've tried many, many things, and they, quite frankly, have not, as they say, improved their overall situation. Incidentally, later tonight, we'll have the national championship. College football. It's a little different. I think we'll stick with sports here at least for a minute so we can finish this up and then we'll go back. We normally don't do it this way, but that'll be 8 Eastern time tonight. Clemson and number 1 Alabama. And I was trying to see the over-under is 58.5, and Bama is the odds-on favorite there, as you probably have already figured out. Let me just give the NBA scores while we're here. The Nets were in Chicago. Nets 117-100. The Lakers were at the T-Wolves. The T-Wolves actually won a game. Of course, their coach is unemployed. 108-86. The Magic were in Los Angeles. The Clippers 106-96. The Heat and Hawks 106-82 for the Heat. The Wizards and the Thunder. The Thunder didn't have any lightning or storm. It was the Wizards 116-104. to 98 in OKC. The Pacers in Raptors, it was all Raptors. The Raptors 121 to 105. And finally, the Hornets and Suns in Phoenix. The Suns were not very hot. The Hornets were 119 to 113. And now we'll go back to the National Hockey League. We're sort of roaming around and around here. Okay. Anyway, we have the Hurricanes were at the Senators. Hurricanes 5-4. The Rangers and Coyotes. The Rangers the Coyotes shut out the Rangers 5-0. And the Devils and the Golden Knights of Las Vegas. It was the Knights 3-2 over the Devils of Detroit. The Devils. I'm not sure what the Devils are. Anyway, the Red Wings. I do know the Red Wings in Detroit and the Capitals 3-2. And anyway, we know where the Golden Knights are. The Jersey Devils. Okay. Anyway, the Stars and Jets of Winnipeg. It was the Jets 5-2. Won there. They won the game, and it was the Hawks and Penguins in Pittsburgh. It was the Hawks of Chicago. Our old friend Judy used to have that as her favorite team. Anyway, 5-3 over the Penguins. And finally, the Oilers and the Anaheim Ducks. The Oilers of Edmonton shut out the Ducks 4-0. Now, let me get this sports story here. This is from the People's World. African-American head coaches fired after change to the Rooney Rule that was named after the late owner of the Pittsburgh team, the Steelers. The end of the NFL's regular season last Sunday was brutal for head coaches league-wide. This is incidentally by Al Neal. Within seconds of the final game and into Monday, the axe came down on 8 coaches. Tom Bowes, the Jets, and Vincent Joseph of the Indianapolis Colts, and Marvin Lewis, he'd been around a long time with the Bengals, and Adam Greasy of Miami, and the Marlins, Steve Wilkes, and the coach of the Arizona Cardinals, Dirk Kenta, and Hugh Jackson of Cleveland. Kenta was with the Buccaneers. And Mike McCarthy of Green Bay, of course, he was fired mid-season. Green Bay had a disastrous season until the December the 12th. Revisions in the NFL clubs must interview at least one diversity candidate for the Career Development Advisory Panel list of diversity candidates not currently employed by the club. Since the inception of the Rooney Rule, we have seen the rule adopted across business sectors and considered an industry best practice to increase diversity. The commissioner there, another one of these failed commissioners, Roger Goodell, said the policy update made today will boost the current Rooney Rule requirements and intended to create additional opportunities for diversity candidates to be identified, interviewed, and ultimately hired when a vacancy becomes available. Clearly, the league is constantly forward-thinking in addressing social issues on and off the field and hiring, etc. The new standards are calculated in response to the accusation teams, the Oakland Raiders here, circumventing the rule by by interviewing minority candidates not seem to be legitimate contenders for the job. Our focus was simple on how do we make the Rooney Rule better. That is from Robert Gulliver, the league's executive in charge of human resources. Here's where it's a bit suspicious. 5 of the 8 coaches fired midway through the regular season are African Americans. This left only 3 African American coaches in the league. Enacted in December of 2002, the Rooney Rule named that was after the late owner Dan Rooney and former chair of the NFL's Workplace Advisory Council, initially required each team with a head coach vacancy to interview at least one minority candidate. The rule was created in reaction to the 2002 firing of Tony Dungy. He was at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and Dennis Green, who was with the Minnesota Vikings. Shortly after that, civil rights attorney Cyrus Mihira and Johnny Cochran released a study showing that African-American head coaches were less likely to be hired and more likely to be fired than their European or white counterparts. Not surprising given ours and the league's history. Up until 1979, Tom Flores was brought on by the Raiders. He was a Latino, was the only minority coach in the history, was Fritz Pollard. Or is it Pollard? Anyway, we all know it wins and it goes home, said John Wooden, the chairman of Fritz Pollard Alliance, in a telephone interview with the Washington Post. That is a Fritz Pollard Alliance is a diversity group which works closely with Major League, with the NFL. The league's remaining minority coach, Mike Tomlin of the Steelers, and Anthony Lane of the Los Angeles Chargers, and Ron Rivera, the old defensive player for the Bears, who fell short. I guess we can throw that in. They met the mighty Philadelphia team. Anyway, the Workplace Diversity Committee reaffirmed their commitment to strong accountability measures if the clubs fail to comply or seek to evade the rules procedures. With 8 vacancies comes an opportunity for minority head coach candidates like Kansas City Chiefs offensive coach Eric Bellany and New England's linebacker coach Brian Flores, right? Jim Cantwell, former coach of the Indiana Colts and Detroit Lions. And while clubs are in their planning stage, they should look long and hard and bring back Mr. Colin Kaepernick. We agree there in the 2019 draft class. Quarterbacks market is predictably thin, and it is thin this year around. If you start looking at some of the teams and how they came out, we'll probably append this study here. We will. Black coaches in the National Football League. This is in 2002. So now let us move on here. We sometimes spend a little time doing a little bit differently. Tell us how you like it. We talked last night on the week that was about the 1 in 10 apartments or flats in Seattle that are empty and rents are dropping. That's in Seattle. That would be so-called market conditions. Mike Rosenberg is the author here. Seattle built the fourth most apartments of any metro area in the country the past year. That would be 2018. Only New York, Los Angeles, much larger cities, and Dallas built more. I guess Dallas is building. And it's across King County, which is Seattle, Snohomish County. Rents dropped 1.1% from third to fourth quarter. The biggest quarterly drop this decade, behind the only 2.9% seen at the time last year. So rents are dropping, but rents are still expensive. On First Hill, that is in Seattle, they're giving out $2,000, actually $2,500 Amazon gift cards. 2 months free rent plus $1,000 gift card if you move in within 1 week. That's in Kirkland. So if you're out in the neighborhood and need something to get in there. On the east side, rents dropped 2.5 or nearly $50. Well, the old scheme used to be some of the lower price landlords used to go up $25 for tenants that are around, and new ones it was usually $50 more. Rents dropped 3% in the past quarter in Belltown. That's also downtown Seattle. South Union Lake, over by the University District there. Used to live in Seattle, confessed that a long time ago. No Amazon, no Microsoft, and we beat it before that time. thought we would throw that out and let us fly on here. Out in Montana, community turns out to remember shared stories of Henry Scott. Henry Scott evidently was an Aboriginal person there. Scott's mother, Paula Castro, and others held boxes of red glitter for people to gather and to toss over the casket there. Over 350 people came to the Lomé High School gym for Scott's funeral. Also wore a red and missing and murdered indigenous woman. She was an indigenous woman. And girls, a movement trying to stop violence and mistreatment of Native American women and girls. In visiting with Paula, I found out about Henny's death. And one of the first things that didn't surprise me, that she was angry and frustrated. Mrs. Bear said Bear is a pastor there. And Scott's funeral ceremony took place 8 days after her body was discovered by a volunteer search party. Looking in the area west of Lemmy Deer in Muddy Creek area, acting tribal president Conrad Fisher said at the time that she was found in the area behind a house is covered with snow. She was reported missing by the Bureau of Indian Affairs on the 13th of December. The Montana Department of Justice issued a missing and endangered person advisory. The FBI has yet to provide information about Scott's death. This is from the Missoulian here. Perhaps Mary out in Montana will know more about this. In the New York Times, our old buddy Professor Ishmael Reed play challenging Hamilton's will gets a reading there. This is by Debs, Sopan Debs, on the 4th of January in the New York Times, of all places, in the cinema or theatrical section. Hamilton has been an industry-changing phenomenon since its Broadway premiere in 2015. But the show has its detractors, and one manifestation of this criticism will take place this weekend in New York in a reading of a play by Ishmael Reed, The Hunting Life of Lynn Manuel Miranda, which will be held, and I don't want to try to pronounce this, the Poets Cafe on the Lower East Side, and will run through the 7th today. The play is directed by Rooney Rule and will aim at what Professor Reed, a prominent, prolific, no doubt about that, satirical writer, who was awarded the MacArthur Grant, that was in 1998. He's in good company there. Believes are inaccuracies with Hamilton. Some academics have long said the show glosses over the role of slavery in the period and has criticized the way Hamilton is presented. Mr. Neal said in an interview that Professor Reed, Mr. Reed, we'll call him Professor Reed, began writing his play at the beginning of last year. He was talking about the subject a lot. And if you go to Facebook, Ishmael Reed, you'll find he has been indeed talking about it. How they could put up a play about Hamilton and call him an abolitionist. He was no abolitionist. When he was a slave trader. The play itself is described as being about a playwright who is misled by a historian of white history into the belief that Hamilton was an abolitionist in his path to learning Hamilton's true story. The work also criticizes Hamilton for not including Native Americans and white indentured servants. The plot educates an actors playing Lin Manuel Miranda, excuse me, the creator of Hamilton. Mr. Reed's two-part National Book Award finalist, will take part in the reading the role of Miranda's agent, Mr. Neal, said they're trying to raise money for the play to be staged at the Narrokanian? Anyway, once the readings are finished, last week Hamilton took a record $4 million in box office sales on Broadway at the Kennedy Center. The musical received one of its prestigious honors for the first institution given one for the show. Reads issues with the musical track with those academics who have criticized Hamilton, like Annette Gordon Reed, no relation to Professor Reed. I thought she was. A professor of history and law at Harvard, has spoken out against it and the portrayal of Hamilton as uncompromising abolitionist. This is just crazy. Reed is now consulting with the creators of Hamilton about the historic accuracy of a traveling exhibit the show is planning. It's not clear whether Miranda is aware of the hunting of Lin-Manuel Miranda, as spokesman for Hamilton, declined to comment. I bet so. But perhaps he might invite Neil and Professor Reed to see Hamilton, since neither of them have seen the show. Well, I don't think Professor Reed wants to waste his time on that particular issue. We rolled on here. I think we'll conclude at this point in time. One other item here, the campaigner, human rights advocate, Comrade Angela Davis was to receive a civil rights award from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. It was canceled, no doubt, by a collection of Uncle Toms there. She is from Birmingham, lived down the street from the little girls that were killed, and they just gave as an excuse her membership in the Black Party, the Black Panther Party, and in the Communist Party of the USA. She was born in 1944 and experienced segregation as a child, no doubt about that. Reagan tried to kill her. Famous trial out in California, Northern California. The board said it recognizes Davis' statue as a scholar and a prominent figure in civil rights history, but believes this decision is consistent with the details of the award's namesake, Reverend Shuttlesworth. I would disagree there. The board apologized to our supporters and the community and Ms. Davis for the confusion that's caused. Caused a lot of confusion when Uncle Toms, as they say, arrive at the there. This kind of reminds me, and I guess when we get on to YouTube doing our videos, we used to do videos on live stream all the time. Anyway, nonetheless, the white supremacists evidently got a new scheme going on. They are chugging a lug milk. And geneticists are alarmed. The whole idea there is that geneticists are holding their convention. I'll have more on this. The chugging of milk is a lot of African Americans are lactose intolerant. So therefore they cannot drink milk. But we at this mic can drink a gallon of milk. There's no problem right there. Don't drink a lot of milk, but we can drink it. Enters the milk zone with a map lit from the scientific journal on the traits evolutionary theory. With the arrival of the first cattle herds in Europe, they were in Africa before that, some 5,000 years ago, a chance mutation that left it turned on provide enough of a nutritional legs up, and nearly all those who survived carried it. In the post, the link there's a snippet of hate speech urging individuals of African descent to leave America if you can't drink milk. Well, African Americans are not the only ones that cannot drink milk, period. And we'll have more on this later. This will do it for us from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on the 7th of January 2019, the Monday morning quarterback. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Incidentally, this week we have on tap an open source report. Doing some traveling today, so we won't be able to do it. We thought we would. And on BR on the World, or Boston Red on the World, we need to report on the activities of the Yellow Vests. They're still at it in France. So there's a lot of, as they say, disorganization in the world these days. Even in Gabon, there evidently was a coup there. The radio station was taken over. I guess they don't have a TV station.